and crimes against humanity, victories we should celebrate on the Day of International Criminal Justice. However, many obstacles to international justice remain, and some are worsening. There are still many places around the world where victims do not have access to justice. African governments have accused the ICC of targeting African leaders, while others feel there is just not enough being done by other organizations. Joining us in studio is Human Rights Watch Southern African researcher, Dewa Mahvinga. Very good morning to you.
Morning, thanks for having me.
Firstly, can you explain to us why this day was created in the first place?
Well, the International Justice Day is there to celebrate the founding of the International Criminal Court by the Rome Statute in 1998, 17th of July. So it is a day to celebrate efforts to ensure that there is no immunity from abuses in terms of human rights violations, because states are bound, who are members of the ICC, to prosecute individuals who commit crimes against humanity, genocide, and war crimes. So this is why today we celebrate and say justice matters, and it is important for states within their jurisdictions to ensure justice, but also if there is no such justice domestically, the ICC is there to ensure that globally people do not escape from the arm of justice.
And why does the International Criminal Court remain crucial for the African continent?
Well, mainly because some jurisdictions may be unwilling or unable to prosecute themselves, or even their leadership may be on the forefront of committing these abuses. So the ICC is important to ensure that there is global justice. So despite the criticisms that some may view as maybe an unfair target on Africa, and some African heads of states have said they would want the ICC to guarantee immunity for sitting heads of states. But what is important today is for more support to be given to the ICC than less.
There is a sense that the ICC is targeting African leaders. Is there some truth in that?
Well, the ICC needs to look at perhaps more broadly other issues beyond Africa. But the bottom line is that wherever there are abuses, there is need for accountability. And if you look at some of the cases on the African continent, including in Kenya, the referrals were from the countries themselves. The parties involved would say, let's go to The Hague for justice. So it is not really about the ICC, but it's important for the ICC to review its working mechanisms. The prosecutor, the chief prosecutor of the ICC is from the continent, the African continent, and therefore there is scope for that broadening. Certainly it is no justification for African states to seek to withdraw from the ICC, because we need justice. We need to ensure that victims have hope.
Now, the AU wants the continent to have its own court for dealing with human rights abuses. What is the likelihood of the African continent having our own court?
Well, the challenge has always been that of resources. Look at the African Union itself. The bulk of its budget is externally funded. So to have our own court would be a good idea, but it should not be the basis to substitute an existing framework for an idea that has not been implemented. So what should come first is to say, establish the African Court on Human Rights, have it working, and then look at how it complements with the ICC. If you look at the Southern African Development Community, SADC, the tribunal that was there, that had individual recourse for human rights abuses, now it has been stripped of that function. So that shows that really in terms of justice issues, there is need to ensure that the broader overarching framework remains in place.
And some of the African Union member states were considering pulling out. Is this still the case? And what other countries are not actually part of the ICC and should be? Well,
unfortunately, it is still the case, and partly triggered by the issue of the Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir, and also South Africa failed to arrest him when he was in South Africa last June, and today he is in Kigali. But Rwanda is not part of the ICC, but there has been a request from the ICC that he should be arrested and be handed over to the ICC. So these kinds of discussions are fueling South Africa's and Africa's resolve to try and pull out. But it is not a good idea, and one hopes that the AU summit in Kigali will not resolve to pull out, but rather would resolve to continue to support the ICC and ensure that there are reforms within the ICC, but not necessarily to do away with the ICC. Other countries like Zimbabwe, for instance, are reluctant to be part of the ICC because of fear of accountability for human rights abuses going on there. But what is important is to say, what are the peoples of Africa looking up to? They need justice, they need human rights, and they need to feel that they are protected. And when they are not protected, they have a recourse to justice with the ICC.
You're quite right there, Dewa. Now, we've seen justice served to some officials involved in war crimes, especially that of 1994 Rwanda genocide, for example. But why does it take so long to arrest these rebels, the dictators, these leaders? Sometimes it even takes decades before an arrest is made.
Well, the challenge has to do with the difficulties involved in investigations, the huge costs involved in investigations, and sometimes also the reluctance or the refusal by states to cooperate with investigators. So if you look at, for example, the case of Kenya, where witnesses were unduly influenced, and it took so long for the investigators to access those witnesses, to record statements, and sometimes during abuses, people do not have that time to properly record what's happening, and that then complicates matters, and as a result it takes years because there will be resistance. If you look at Cote d'Ivoire, the country would say on the basis of sovereignty they are unwilling to hand over suspects to the ICC in The Hague to investigate. So that again makes it much more difficult to ensure that justice is served.
And the AU summit begins today. Do you think that we'll see less or more support from the AU with regards to the ICC on the continent?
As human rights defenders and people calling for justice and saying justice matters, we would want to see more support for the ICC from the African leaders. But unfortunately, there is a sense that the AU has become, a club, an old boys club of people who protect each other, who are with al-Bashir, who is an indictee of the ICC, and therefore we may find that, unfortunately, they may go the other way. But as citizens of Africa, we would want to see more support for justice, and in line with the theme that is there of the year for human rights, especially in protection of the rights of women and children. And women and children suffer most in most of these conflicts. Look at South Sudan, look at Burundi, look at Nigeria, Boko Haram. All those things need to be at the form of the discussions when African leaders think about pulling out of the ICC.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Very informative there. That was Human Rights Watch researcher Dewa Mahvinga telling us more about the International Day of Justice. And of course, let's